So, namaste and a warm greetings to everybody. We'll start this session with an invocation of song on Mahatma Gandhi. Let me just share the song. So, thank you so much for your kind attention, and it's indeed a great pleasure and indeed an honor to have with such important gathering. And thank you so much for your kind attention. Thank you so much for joining us in this morning. First of all, my greetings to all of you of Nelson Mandela Day. You know, this day recognizes Mandela achievements in working towards democracy, strengthening democracy, conflict resolution, human rights, peace, and reconciliation. Celebrating humanity, Mandela's life and global call for action was for people to recognize their ability to make an imprint and change the world around them. I can remember one important quotation of Nelson Mandela. It's easy to break and dawn and destroy. The heroes are those who make peace and unity. It is an honor and privilege to have available with us our distinguished speaker, Dr. Janice as Ellis. I extend my warm welcome to our Chief Patron, Dr. Professor Anand Kumar Giri, Professor at Madras Institute of Developing Studies and founding honorary executive trustee of the Sweden Center for Asian Listening, and all the respected participants, viewers, listeners. Thank you so much for joining us today. Uh, I would like some of respected participants to kindly mute themselves so that we can avoid disruption. Yes, thank you so much. Let me give a brief introduction of our honorable speaker, Dr. Janice as Ellis. For 35 years, more than 35 years, Dr. Ellis analyzes educational, political, social, and economic issues across race, ethnicity, age, and socioeconomic status. She holds a PhD in communication art and two master's degree from the University of Wisconsin, Madison. Her first book, From Liberty to Magnolia, In Search of American Dream, published in 2018, has received several national and international awards since its initial release. The most recent is the Independent Press Award for Race Relations. It was noted that the competition is judged by experts from different aspects of the book industries, including publishers, writers, editors, book covers, designers, and professional copywriters. Selected award winners are and distinguished favorites are based on overall excellence. In 2020, the Independent Press Award had in tries worldwide. Participating authors and publishers reside in the countries such as Australia, Brazil, Cambodia, Canada, India, Ireland, and others. Uh, Dr. Ellis' most recent book is Shaping Public Opinion: How Real Advocacy Journalism Should Be Practiced. One again, the many blind non-fiction journalism about reporting honesty, integrity, and civility must be the priority among journalists and commentators if we are to serve a dependent and valuable public and safeguard a fundamental truth of the democracy that is focused of the book. The book has received a great national editorial reviews and endorsement. And today we are going to talk about the fundamental or the sole concept of a thought and a kind of crux of her thought is the belief that the wise use of words is what advances the good society was defined. Before the talk of our honorable speaker, I would like to invite our chief patron, Deepika Dave, to kindly share some words about Raise Global Foundation. So, ma'am, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Randhir Gautam, for the for organizing this wonderful webinar. Hello and namaste to our honorable guest speakers, Janice, Ellis, and Professor Ananta Giri, and all our participants. Please accept my warm greetings. It is our pleasure to have you all today with us on this webinar. I am Deepika Dave, the founder of Rising Ambitions of Young Society. During Randhir, do you have the slide, please?
Yes, I have the slide.
Can you run that, please?
Yes, I will share.
So during
Please
my
carry on.
entrepreneurship, I have seen many lives struggling from substance abuse, inability to gain financial independence, and being unaware of their social existence. So due to this, I started writing about women's social, cultural, and financial issues on social media. I began to receiving phone calls from women in dire situations about the injustice and oppression they faced in our communities. I counseled them, guided them, and supported them. Now, working in this field for last 4 years, I realized that the problem is still huge and still prevalent, and we need to bring change regarding social norms, stereotypes, and bias. So I believe in order to bring this desirable change in our community, we must start with ourselves. And so I'm extremely proud to have founded the Raise Global Foundation, a 501c3 nonprofit organization in May 2019. RAISE stands for Rising Ambitions of Young Society, of 501c3 nonprofit organization with a vision of strengthening the socio-cultural richness to cultivate leadership capacity, focusing on gender equality and empowering the young generation with their rights to have a voice regardless of race, creed, caste, religion, and social status, where RAISE enters the mission of building a support network in the USA and in India to educate, engage, and empower the young generation by promoting and advocating an array of topics from drug awareness to financial literacy and leadership for their development and women empowerment. Hundreds of girls, women, boys, and men have benefited from our gender equality awareness campaign in India. We have employed 30 women in Delhi and still strive to have more working women in the rural areas of India and have more women representation in the professional and political fields in the USA and in India. We want to make we do not make only women aware, men too. So race believe that we need to create a culture that values and respects and looks up to and idealizes all races as equal, all men and women as important and valuable. We have led we we must educate boys and men to understand, realize, and accept women's feelings, women's freedom, women's work, women's rights, and their free identity. We have led many workshops and webinars on financial literacy and women and young generations empowerment in the USA and in India. During COVID-19 pandemic, Race donated over 1,800 medical masks in Delhi, in slum areas, and in North and South Carolina. And they were donated to communities, members, and essential frontline workers such as CMS Nutrition Services Department, employees of church food banks, volunteers, and homeless and crisis shelter workers, and cleaning services, crews, and everywhere in North and South Carolina. So during pandemic, we held many webinars, online workshops on mental health, medical expenses, and financial literacy to help our community. So we partner with the government of the city of Charlotte and a very reputed and prestigious national organization for advancement of colored people, the NAACP, and California-based company named Drug Free World, and now with Raffles University in Haryana, Neemrana. Ray's primary objectives includes advocating the policy which is based on gender equality. We want to help girl child to have a necessary life skills to negotiate the key life decisions. We strive to eliminate discrimination and violence against young people across religion and ethnicity, thus root out the systemic racism in our justice system and society. We'll provide the consultation by ensuring the voices of women across the marginalized community, and we will run leadership development programs for young boys and young girls. Today, RAISE is proud to organize a webinar on the topic of advancing good society, real advocacy, journalism in action. Today's journalism is a far cry from what it used to be. In the past, you received the majority of your news and information from your local newspaper and published every morning. If you didn't get it there, then you watched the evening news after dinner, and that's it. Now we see the news as it's happening instead of getting recaps of it next day. With the rise of internet and 24/7 news stations, we have an abundance of news, news sources directly at our fingertips. According to the American Press Institute website, the purpose and importance of journalism is to inform society with the information they need to live their lives, information they need to make decisions about different things. Journalism is very important in our world. It was important in the past and it is still very important now. Public needs to better understand the purpose and the function of the press. I would say that we need to have to excavate the industry of journalism for we need to have some outsiders to excavate the industry of journalism. For what society do we want? What do we have? How can the press be used to get what we want? So now we have really good and some bad news that few days ago I was reading that social media has become the main source of news online with more than 2.4 billion internet users, and nearly 64.5% receive breaking news from Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Snapchat, and Instagram instead of traditional news media. The survey found that 57% increase in traffic to news sites referred from social media. So we may find some unbiased political media coverage, which is vital for a healthy democracy. Sometimes we may not. So see, we really have good speakers today who would give us more in-depth information about our how journalism is really so important in advancing our society better. I must say that we want to see more and more youth and women in the world of journalism. It is empowering, it is uplifting, and it builds bridges that span the world, crossing cultural, religious, and nations. Like
Thank you so much.
we have that last uh, slide that for our upcoming events and programs, please visit our page at facebook.com Raise Global Foundation to watch our videos, subscribe to our YouTube channel at Raise Global Foundation. For any inquiries or collaboration opportunities, please email us at raiseglobalfoundation@gmail.com. And for more info, please visit our website. And thank you all for your prestigious time, and namaste.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, our chief patron, Deepika Dave, ma'am. Now it's time for our uh, great presentation by our respected Dr. Janice. So we are eagerly waiting you, ma'am. Please continue your presentation. You are most welcome. Kindly unmute yourself. Yes. Yes.
Okay. And share the screen.
Yes. Yes. Uh, yes, it is visible.
Okay, is it there? Good.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Yes.
It's not visible.
It's visible.
Do you see the screen?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. First of all, thank you so much for having me. And I'm going to say good evening to all of those who are joining in India. Good morning to those who are joining in the States. And greetings to all who may be joining from points in between in different time zones. First of all, I want to say it is a tremendous honor and thank you for inviting me. And especially on this day, we are recognizing the International Day for Nelson Mandela, who was one of the greatest advocates in our generation. He not only lost his freedom fighting for others to have freedom and to rid them of oppression, but he paved the way on how we do it. You wouldn't say he was a typical journalist, but yes, his words mattered. And what I'm saying today in my presentation is that there are many avenues beyond the traditional ones for us to be real advocate journalists. Nelson Mandela achieved a lot in advancing society and giving us messages worldwide, but there is so much left to be done. And I'm certain he would want us to continue to influence and make things better for society in our orbits of influence, whatever that might be, how large or how small. And that brings me to my topic today. And it is critically important, maybe in a time more than ever, that there's a need, what I'm calling real advocacy journalism. Yes, there are advocates out there, but not all of them are practicing real advocacy journalism to advance the good in society. I define real advocacy journalism as journalism that shuns demagoguery, half-truths, distortions, and what has become known as, quote, fake news, okay? Real advocacy journalism sticks to facts, logic, truth, and chooses to use language that we all can understand. Without real advocacy journalism in the current divisive political environment that we have, not only in the United States, but in countries all across the world, what is best for humanity really is at risk. So what do real advocate journalists do? What do they do? First, they inform with facts. They persuade for the good, not the divisiveness of or harm. And they're about bringing about positive change, or a combination of all of those things. So what are some of the typical ways that we see it today? Newspaper columnists, of course, radio commentators, network news and cable TV commentators, bloggers, and yes, social media, which is another topic all within itself, because so much on social media is a creation of many groups, zealots, people pushing their own agenda, along with those who are trying to get actual news out. But how do you distinguish? And we'll get to that a little bit later on. Some of the non-typical ways that real advocate journalists can impact society today, and have in the past: books, nonfiction books, sometimes fiction books, when they are addressing an issue that is critical, or a condition that is critical to the well-being of society. So some of the non-typical ways that advocacy journalism presents itself would be in books and their adaptations, whether documentaries or plays. Alexander Hamilton, for example. Broadcast media, of course, TV, radio, special interest publications, and of course, speeches that we know Nelson Mandela used a lot, and as well as others. But basically, and too often, a lot of the advocate journalists today, they're biased. They put forth a partisan agenda. They use distortions and half-truths. They promote their own personal agenda, sometimes very irrationally, and some are zealous. We see all of that taking place in the public dialogue in the United States. And I'm sure in your countries too, you see some elements of advocacy that is not done in the best interests of the public. But practitioners of real advocacy journalism, as I discuss in my book, I make a distinction between real advocacy journalism and advocacy journalism, because they both exist today. You have the purists who think that, oh, advocacy and journalism, they do not go together. But we all know that since freedom of the press, since the history in the United States and in other parts of the world where freedom of the press is alive and well, advocacy has been a part of freedom of the press since the beginning. We see it, and we saw it, continue to see it in the editorial pages of newspapers, the op-eds, opposite page of the editorial page where you have guest commentators. We see it in radio commentary, news, even in news. I was struck at 14 years old by a commentator named Eric Severide on the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite. My mother and I used to watch CBS News religiously after school, and he came on and put the assassination of President Kennedy in perspective for me. And it changed my life. I looked then to those who can interpret the incidents that maybe I didn't fully understand. So practitioners of real journalism, they impart facts, truths, they provide evidence, they focus on the public good, and they speak with authority, research, expertise, experience. And what's so critically important is that those messages should really be for the most vulnerable among us. As Mahatma Gandhi said, the measure of any society can be determined and seen on how it treats its most vulnerable. And yet there's a school of thought which says, leave the most vulnerable, those who may or may not be able to understand the news, those who may or may not be able to understand what it means to them, their family, their community, their nation. Leave it up to them to interpret what has happened in their world today. Well, I beg to differ, because real advocacy journalism has its place in the public dialogue, has its place in how news is delivered, interpreted, and advocated. Why did I become a practitioner of real advocacy journalism? We're all products of our past. There are forces that shape us from the days we were born and how we experience life thereafter. Well, obviously I have two indelible birthmarks, inescapable birthmarks. I was born Black and woman. And to compound that, I was born in the hotbed of racism and on a small farm in Mississippi, where the Klan was very active as my father tried to help register people to vote. During that time, crosses were burned on our lawn. I had a classmate whose father was killed. I had a classmate whose father was castrated, left in a ditch for dead. So those are things that affected my life. We were born in poverty on a farm, 7 kids, but we had values, and my parents taught us values and try to make a difference in the world, no matter what. And I delved into books. Books became my friend. They were my way out of the place of my birth and the experiences that time shared. There were other forces. Went to segregated schools, but I had great teachers who taught the books that were before them. And so I'm very thankful for that. It was a teacher that told me, Janice, I think you can go to college. Huh. Coming from my background, college was not an option. But I went to segregated schools, was taught very, very good. I made good grades, and it financed my entire education. But then there were other things, forces happening around me. The civil rights movement, very, 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 very hot during my teenage years. Mississippi was the hotbed of racial discrimination and movements, actually. Women's liberation was on the heels of the civil rights movement. So that shaped me. But again, that encounter with Eric Severide on the CBS Evening News let me know that there was some way that I could get involved. Words have power, and I can get involved to try to make a difference. And then in my sophomore year in college, Martin Luther King Jr. came to Tougaloo College to help organize demonstrations in Jackson to get the vote, to have African Americans sit in the same space, go to the same bathroom, drink from the same fountain. It affected me tremendously. When he was assassinated, it so affected me that I left this predominantly Black school to go to an all-white school to further integrate it. So the questions become, for those forces that are impacting our lives, what do we do to impact those forces? And so I looked at the Civil Rights Act when I got into graduate school. I looked at the Equal Rights Amendment, which, by the way, it has been presented before Congress since 1972, the amendment. It has never been ratified by 38 states. So quiet as it's kept, the Equal Rights Amendment is still not passed. The Civil Rights Act passed. But look today, look at what's happening today. It's been 50 years since those two pivotal pieces of legislation were enacted, but they have still to be fulfilled. So why did I become a practitioner of real advocacy journalism? Those were some of the other forces that were impacting me. So what did I do? I stumbled in graduate school on one of the most foremost advocate journalists of the last 100 years, Walter Lippmann. Walter Lippmann was syndicated in 250 newspapers nationwide and another 50 across the world. And he practiced, not that he called it real advocacy journalism, but during my dissertation, I went to Yale and I delved into all of his papers, all of his works. He wrote 4,000 columns. He wrote 13 books. And what jumped out at me was the consistency in which his messages and his words resonated. He tried to do, through two world wars, working and influencing 3 presidents, he tried to advise and do what was in the public's best interest. So what did I do? I thought, first, you have to, a real advocate journalist must be prepared. They must know their trade. They must have a sense of themselves and what they want to value and what they want to contribute to society. Are they out for personal agendas? And it's so painful to see in our many leaders today that they will rather pursue a special interest group's agenda rather than the agenda of those who put them in office. And so I had to come to terms with, what does it mean to be Black in America, across the world? America is not the only country that has race relations problems or gender equality problems. It confronts all nations. I don't know of one where some element of racism and some element of sexism and gender inequality does not exist. So a real advocate journalist has to say, what is my purpose? What is my role? It has to go beyond me. It has to be bigger than me. So what motivates an advocate journalist? I think when you come up against your dreams, the ideals and the principles, the Constitution, for example, all men are created equal, the Declaration of Independence, but really are they? So what do you do when you face unavoidable collisions in your personal, professional life, your community life? For me, it was plexiglass ceilings. It was all kinds of barriers just because of the way I look. And I thought, no. Something has to be done about that. So I set out to try to inform, inspire, pave the way. I thought my life should be about real advocacy journalism. So then there go my books and my commentary. I have to share this with you. I started writing for a radio station, one of the largest ABC affiliates. I just walked into the radio station and said, I analyze things pretty well. Can I have time on your show? And the guy politely said, who the heck are you? And so I showed him my writings, and I left out of there with a 2-minute radio commentary that lasted for a number of years until I worked for the mayor of Milwaukee. That was in Wisconsin. My career has been in government and in the private sector. So I know firsthand what it means to be a Black and woman across education. I was the first. I had professors to tell me that there was no way I was going to get my PhD. Being a mother of 2 kids, I walked into their classrooms pregnant with both of them and had labor pains with both of them, went, had my babies, stayed out, went back. It took me 8 years to finish my PhD, but I was determined to do that. So I write my books to show the gravity of what it means to confront systemic racism and sexism, and yet be triumphant. I wanted my first book, From Liberty to Magnolia, In Search of the American Dream. It's titled after those 2 towns where my dad's farm was. A little town called Liberty in Mississippi, mind you, and Magnolia. Liberty, the symbol of freedom. Magnolia, I don't know if you know about the magnolia tree. It's beautiful. It has beautiful white blossoms, the symbol of beauty. But that wasn't the case for African Americans living in Mississippi. And so I wanted to show my first book, show the gravity of what that does and how it impacts young people, the vulnerable, the most vulnerable among us. And also chronicle my journey through education, higher education, and the challenges there. I chronicled the journey in corporate America, worked for a pharmaceutical industry, in the pharmaceutical industry for 15 years, government for 10 years. And there are blocks all along the way. But also in my book, I talk about how you can be triumphant, how you can overcome them. And so my columns, back to that, I would be on a plane on a business trip, writing a column on a cocktail napkin. I wrote because I was compelled to write. I wrote often for community papers, newspapers, a major newspaper, Kansas City Star, I wrote for years, but I also wrote for community newspapers, anybody who would listen, because I wanted to keep in front the gravity of all the things that we can do to improve society with our words, with the right words. So my books and my commentary are targeted to Americans. And I'm happy to say that with the internet, my books now are worldwide, on Amazon and Books A Million, Barnes and Noble. So I'm thankful for that. But I write my books not for those who agree, not for those who may not be racist or may not be sexist, but for everyone, for the racist, the non-racist, the sexist, the non-sexist, those who have the courage to make a difference. That's what real advocacy journalism is about. And we are in desperate need of real advocacy journalism today. For those of us who are too busy. And Shaping Public Opinion talks about why, the reasons, the conditions in society. You have people who are so consumed with survival on day to day. All they need to do is turn on their TV, go to social media, and be told a distorted view of the world and what is going on and the things that will directly impact their lives. So we are obligated as real advocate journalists to be factual, be truthful, make sure our motives are not our own, but for the public good. And I outline in the book, using the methods of Walter Lippmann as to how that can be done. And how it needs to be done in the world we're living in today. And what will that do? If we do it well and do it right, we will inform. We can stimulate the imagination to help people come to real solutions, not get entrenched in their own selfishness. It can transport us to a better society. Real advocacy journalism can guide, motivate, yes, confront the issues. There are issues, people are talking now about, oh, do not teach critical race theory. But God, isn't that part of our reality? We need to confront those things that are unpleasant in our reality if we ever expect to change them. And then if we do, it can be transforming. And most of all, we should try to offer solutions. So I've gone from trying to say that little girl on that farm, and by the way, the cover of my book has pictures of my dad's crib, my dad's smokehouse, and that's cotton in the background. I couldn't pick cotton because I was afraid of worms, but I learned to cook. And then my other cover of my book shows the incendiary place that we are right now in journalism and how we need to get back to facts, truths, interpreting those facts in a way that advances the good society. So I'm here for questions, if there are any. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for very thought-provoking, inspirational, as well as impressive presentation. Now I would like to invite Professor Anand Kumar Giri as a discussant of today's webinar to give a kind thought on this very presentation. Then we will have question answer session as well. So meanwhile, I request respected participant to kindly drop your question or queries in the chat box. Professor Anand Kumar Giri, sir. Okay. Sir is taking some time. It's really a very fruitful session. I teach sociology, so my question would be from the perspective of sociology. When we understand journalism, we understand news and its making. We live in an era of post-truth where propaganda has become the truth. So news is created and managed by capitalists under a kind of ideological system. News is debated on the basis of too little information. If I talk about Indian journalism, media encourages a kind of intolerant outlook among groups through manufactured truth or manufactured consent, which ultimately leads social disharmony among groups. Even society like India, very diverse in terms of culture. But with the advent of this ideological journalism, we can see a kind of separation between groups, a kind of otherness increasing. So how do you think we can tackle this issue? Yes.
I think first and foremost, we need to get comfortable calling those kinds of messages out. For example, there is a movement in the United States. It's called State Room News. They're organizing nonprofit publications across the states. Right now, there are 21 news organizations in 21 states in the United States that are not controlled by money, corporate America. Those outlets that have hidden agendas that you have to satisfy the owner of that news outlet in terms of how you treat an issue or what issue will be treated. And I'm happy to see that, because I really think that at the end of the day, particularly here in the United States and probably in other places where there's freedom of the press, there must be a movement to weed out the big money that so often control media and dictates what can be published as well as the slant. And I'm just going to say two things here. Look at two different cable news networks. And I don't know that you get them all. I know CNN is worldwide. CNN has an approach. I can look at an issue, a videotape on CNN, then turn to Fox News, which I assume is also worldwide, and it may not even be covered, or if it's covered, there are the commentators interpreting that event in a space where I thought, did they see the same thing? Did they see the same event? So I think, to get to your point, as it's a growing news outlet, in light of the fact that newspapers are sort of dying because, excuse me, because of the internet and online media, you have a news group, state newsrooms is what it's called. Look it up, in the United States, where it's nonprofit, it's supported by foundations, it's supported by contributions, where it's nonpartisan, it's unbiased. And I have to say a full disclaimer. 2 weeks ago, I was invited, based upon my style of writings, to write for the state newsroom in Missouri. And it's going to take those kinds of efforts to weed it out. It's going to take time, just like it has taken time for us to get into this bifurcated, divisive public space. It's going to take time, but we all, in our sphere of influence, have a conversation around your dinner table with your families when you see distortions. Have a conversation in a community forum. We've got the people have power. If we don't exercise it, look at what Nelson Mandela, Mahatma Gandhi, King, we have to take it back. And there are ways that we can take it back, small, incremental ways, and eventually it builds into a crescendo.
Yes, well said, well said. I can see one raising hand. So, Janice M. Gulier. So please.
Good morning. I'm thoroughly learning and enjoying this. And I would like to raise an issue, Dr. Ellis, and that is, how much more important is it now that we begin to teach our young children critical thinking? It's my belief that one way we fell into the cesspool um, of, of just emotional thinking that often plays into our own biases and supports those biases is because there is such a lack of critical thinking across our society. how do we begin to once again teach our youth how to think critically about these important issues that will shape their lives for future generations?
Thank you. Thank you so much. I have to say this. Janice F. Geider is a relative, and she saw this announcement on Facebook, and she said she would be here. I haven't seen Janice in years, and we are named the same. Our parents named us the same. So I have to say that, Janice, so good to see you, and so good to hear from you. What a great question. First, I think parents must take the time to educate our children, again, around the table, help them to think, because kids are not born sexist. They're not born racist. They get that from the environmental forces impacting them. So I think we have to start early with exposing them to what the real world is like and helping them to distinguish what is good and what is not so good. And you know what? Civic education. I don't know how many schools these days teach civic education about how governments work or should work. And look at the history books, how distorted and partial they are, how incomplete and inaccurate they are. It's going to take parents to teach at home. It's going to take parents to organize and ask their schools, their grade schools, their high schools to begin to change the curriculum that will prepare our children to be discerners, critical thinkers, leaders, help them to distinguish what a good society is and is not, and how a good society functions and does not function. And until we make a concerted effort in those areas, get history taught completely in the schools, civic education, and reinforce it at home, bring it up at home, then we are preparing a generation that will not be able to lead. And we all know history. History teaches us good societies, great societies, are destroyed from within, not from some outward force. So it's up to us to do that. And thank you for the question.
Yes,
You're
thank you. Well
welcome. And
explained.
if I might add this, the timing of this is excellent because I am working with a group here in the Midwest, and that's focusing on how do we begin to count those in the MENA population, Middle Easterners, North African population in our studies. And I want you, hopefully, Raise Global Foundation, to start giving some thought to this because it's important that we include all citizens in the United States in our studies, particularly as we look to advance health and to protect health. So thank you very much for this invitation.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I have one question from the Facebook comment. One participant is asking, and in fact raising the question, how we can have journalist integrity. And he's asking question about the very conception of free media. And he said, the reason why free media is a myth is because every news journalist, editor, and producer has their own biases at one hand. On the other hand, educationist, journalists, activists, expert, leaders, political party, religious leaders have others. So how we can tackle the issue of interest and ideology? Yes.
Interest in ideology and as it is manifested in the news outlets? Is that the question?
Yes, yes.
You know, television programs survive based on ratings. And so part of, this, this tendency toward drama, this tendency toward broadcasting discord and conflict, it's because the public devours it. The public too often wants to be entertained. So, we have to get comfortable when we see agendas, when we see distortion, special interest. We have to get comfortable either when there's an opportunity to speak out and challenge it. We need to do that. Or we need to shut it off. Because at the end of the day, those interests are fed by the constant encouragement that we either deliberately or inadvertently support. And a case in point, we all have to, I think, get into the habit of looking at different media. I don't just stay tuned in to CNN. I go to Fox, I go to NBC, I look at cable news. I look at different sources because I think that is the only way that you will be able to recognize special interest agendas that may or may not be true and sort it out. Because if you're stuck on one source of news, good or bad, then you are limiting your ability to make wise choices.
Well explained. So now I would like to invite Professor Anand Kumar Giri sir. Are you there? Yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Janice, for bringing these thoughts together about advocacy, journalism, about media. I wish to begin with the title Good Society that is in your thought today. We need to understand good society. What is good society? Robert Bella was a very deep thinker from the United States. He co-authored a book called The Good Society. And before that, Robert Bella also co-authored a book called Habits of the Heart. So according to Bella, a good society is characterized by what I would, building on Bella, a facilitative institutional ecology. And at the same time, what can be called as the habits of the heart. And that habits of the heart corresponds, of course, to the habits of the mind. So habits of the heart and habits of the mind through appropriate personal values. And these personal values are not just personal, they are also ecological in the sense that like the advocacy journalism, the value of courage, truthfulness, all these things are embodied with us. But it is the ecology of a society. It's like a garden where it helps us to blossom. So as we move along or move on to the theme of advocacy journalism, media, and many other related themes. So therefore, the calling of a good society, we need to understand it this way. Both a facilitative institutional ecology, which I would like to call as evolutionary institutional ecology, because institutions are not stagnant. So we would have to create new institutions. Maybe in the United States, some of the current predicament is that maybe the institutions themselves have outlived their outlived their ability to nurture a good society. What is happening to, for example, the institution of presidency? We just saw what happened. Now, speaking about truth, now what kind of society it is? Just blatant lies, just blatant lies, and there is no legal remedy for it. So there was one person who just propped up the theory about birth. Where is birth? And where was President Barack Obama was born? And then it gave rise to the birth. And there is no remedy for that. Anybody can just blatant lies, and everybody is silent. And I do not know that even the victims of such blatant lies, what kind of remedy we have. Possibly not. The institution of the presidency, for example. And so coming back to the point that a good society is evolving institutional ecology as well as values. And these values, what kind of values they are? The notion of the good in good society invites us to relate good to right, and a very beautiful conjunction of good and right was in the civil rights movement. And Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. embodied that. And, and that good and right in political philosophy, and for example, the great American political philosopher John Rawls, whose work, A Theory of Justice, 50 years we are celebrating. But in A Theory of Justice, when John Rawls was writing about it, and on the background of civil rights movement, now what is the attention to whole civil rights mobilization in thinking about a theory of justice? Not too much, not too much, because Rawls here is mainly pointing to a kind of state logic, existing state logic, and not much about the kind of interrogative mobilization. And no wonder then that theory of justice, it gives primacy to right, R-I-G-H-T. But that right, how does right come about? Rights comes about not in a innocent state structure, but through mobilization. And this mobilization is socio-political mobilization as well as socio-spiritual mobilization. The civil rights movement was a conjunction of both socio-political mobilization as well as socio-spiritual mobilization. And that is how, and that the spiritual dimension of rights. I remember this line from Dr. King some years ago in a misty, cold winter morning. I was in the Library of Congress, and I was looking at the papers of Dr. King and all those addresses, and these are typewritten, typescript. And in Library of Congress, they do not allow you notebooks, they just give you little things and. And I was reading this experience of Dr. King, that what happened when at 11 o'clock in the night, he receives a phone call. And when he receives that, and to whom he is going to call, he's saying that you please, take care of yourself, do not come out, otherwise you, your children, and everybody would be in jeopardy. So his dear wife, Caretta, and children were in bed. His father is away in Atlanta. So whom he is going to call? And at that moment, he had an awakening that it is only God who is the succor. So therefore, good society, any courage, we have seen it in the USA, the kind of trauma this society went through in the last 4 years, unavoidable trauma. This little small thing, and I here remember Governor Mario Cuomo, no, Governor Andrew Cuomo, son of Mario Cuomo. And he was just saying that, there were some people who were on the backdrop of the brutal killing of George Floyd, and people were protesting. A very senior person, in New York was protesting, and then, he was manhandled. And then President Trump is commenting, oh, he is giving a fake appearance that he has been mandated, or he led himself to be mandated. And Andrew Cuomo made this statement. You see, here is a person suffering. Now, what kind of who we are, that we are bereft of the minimum ability just to understand the pain and suffering of others. That minimum ability. So that kind of, and today we all have been benumbed. If everything goes through political correctness, including what has happened to the vaccine. Now, the question of life and death, now is, now both these presidents, President Trump and President Bolsonaro, who denied vaccine, they themselves suffered from COVID, and we are grateful to God and nature that they survived COVID. But think of millions of people who didn't have the access to health care. Now in Brazil, what happened? It is a perpetrated genocide. And who are the victims? Since we are remembering Nelson Mandela today, who are the victims? I have gone to Brazil, and the Afro-Brazilians, and then, the, and the poor and the vulnerable, and the way the power structure in a society works, where both the judiciary and the military, they came together to put an innocent person, President Lola, into bar. Just, and I was in the city, speaking of journalism and advocacy journalism, I was in the city where President Lula was put into bar. And then I was very blessed to be with friends who were, camping in front of the jail, and they were saying, free Lula, free Brazil. And I was invited to share some thought, and I said, free the world. Because it is this capturing of the imprisonment of the world that is happening today. And at that time also, so therefore today the great danger is coming back to that the vulnerability of the individual, innocent individual, you and me, how vulnerable we are today. And that kind of vulnerability. Now, if we look at our Supreme Court of India, today, Chief Justice of Supreme Court of India, Ramana, has said that innocent individual, the way they are being put behind bars. And remember, we are not going to be a silent spectator. And that is also advocacy. Advocacy in the sense that the whole question of advocacy, to be an advocate, advocate of what? Advocate of certain innate sense of dignity. And that was the enduring message of the American Revolution. Each man is born equal, isn't it? And though some contemporary Americans like to write a new Bill of Rights, where they might like to add, some born are more, some men, some men are born more equal than the others. And who are these men? Who are the billionaires? So coming back to this point about good society, very quickly, is that good and rights, but good and right interacting with God, about the story about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. that I presented. And also in a way, both South Africa, where Nelson Mandela, you remember the very difficult moment in Nelson Mandela's life, the whole African, South African democracy. And when, Chief Butelji and that province, people were in arms, and how that society went through that. And it was a God moment in that sense, without being too kind of, too fuzzy about it. I wish to say that you look at what happened in Capitol on January 6th or 7th, how, the whole struggle of American democracy, that how when everybody, even America had to gone through that kind of capture of power and militancy, militant capture, and the way Vice President Mike Pence himself, you remember, he was sitting, and so it was that kind of a God moment in that sense, in the sense that both the election of President Barack Obama, I was there on November 2008, and this very difficult transition, in the sense that that whole good society is right, good, and RITE is from a Confucian tradition, because a good society is not just a rule of law. A good society, building on Robert Bella, is habits of the mind and habits of the heart. And these habits of the mind and habits of the heart are nurtured in rights, RITS, some democratic rights, not just RIGHT. And therefore, journalism has to educate us what are our rights, RITES. And American society has some interesting civic rituals in that sense, like the birthday celebration of Lincoln, and the whole Independence Day, and Martin Luther King Jr., that birthday. All these are civic space. Again, Robert Bella wrote about this whole idea of civic religion, civic religion, and that civic religion. And I had a conversation with Robert Bella at Berkeley in 2003, and we have very interesting conversation about it. And that civic religion today is also transnational, in the sense that American society is also multi-religious. Therefore, the God that we, the American president, speaks about, God bless America. Now that God bless America, it is one idea of God bless America is the idea of the God in Protestantism, for example, which was the unspoken predominant religion. And maybe slowly, the marginalization of Catholics in America, and the way the Catholics themselves were subjected to a lot of persecutions. So, and then, Catholics, and of course the Protestants, and then Hindus, Muslims, look at American society, the Muslims in American society, Malcolm X. And also another story, as I'm an anthropologist, I know that many of the, I have read that many of the people, black people, and again another, the whole about advocacy journalism, and that was a key point, that the way a society imprisons people, and therefore the deliberate destruction of life through imprisonment, like one stroke, two stroke. Who has written this? And of course, I have read that President Biden possibly has given an executive order against capital punishment at the federal level. To come back to this point is that when Afro-Americans, a predominant number of young people from Afro-American society, who should be going to school, but they are put into prison, of course, for one thing or the other. But prisons in a good society should be therapeutic clinics, but it is not. But the kind of destruction, and some of these Afro Americans, they get converted into Islam in the prison themselves. And Islam today is as much an American religion as Protestantism. Therefore, when we speak about God, bless America, now what is our idea of God? Therefore, journalism has to bring these fundamental questions of the contemporary society in the direction of genuine plurality, genuine pluralism. And this pluralism is not static pluralism. The great contemporary American political theorist, William Connolly from the Johns Hopkins University, in his continued deep work on American society and politics, he talks about pluralism as a process, as a pluralization, and therefore how journalism has to contribute to the dignity of each one of us, because it is the dignity of each one of us as part of a pluralization process. Therefore, good society is, according to Bella, is a society of attentiveness, and attentiveness in the place of distraction. And therefore, the whole pervasiveness of fake news today, and that Dr. Janice referred to in her presentation, that fake news is a structural conspiracy of distraction. And this distraction is not innocent. It is like the birther theory, it is not innocent. Now, all these are structural conspiracies to disable us, to destroy us, and that distraction and attentiveness, but also on the economy. In the economy, what has happened? The same thing, distractions. And another great American economist, if Robert Bella from sociology is talking about good society as a society of attention, Jeffrey Sachs, who taught at Harvard, and when he was at Harvard, he came to Russia just after the breakup, Soviet breakup, and he destroyed Russian economy. But luckily, when he came back to USA, he had a change of heart, and he spoke about the earth. How do we take care of the earth? And he also visited Bhutan, and maybe inspired by that, again speaking about values, one thing I wish to say, that experience of moving from one society to the other, and journalism do that, and American journalists have done that. And as a few days ago, we have a dear journalist from India who was killed in Afghanistan, and the kind of courage that journalists have shown and in fighting against Vietnam War. But the larger question is that for cultivation of values today, most of the societies are becoming xenophobic. And I remember Robert Bella, Professor Bella, making this comment about then President George W. Bush, the Bush Jr. He said that before becoming the president, The president had not even gone to Europe. Now think of.
Sir, if you can summarize,
Yes, yes.
we have
Okay.
time constraint also.
Sure,
Although it
sure,
is very interesting talk, it is very interesting.
sure.
Yes,
So maybe another 5 minutes
5 minutes. Hmm.
or
Yes,
two
sir.
to 3 minutes, 2 to 3 minutes.
Just 2 to
So,
3 minutes.
so, so therefore, the whole idea of now a society, American society, for example, majority of Americans, maybe I do not know what number, they do not know any other language except English language. That kind of monolinguality. So, with this coming to journalism, advocacy journalism, therefore, journalism is a journey, and that journey, if we link to the notion of pilgrimage, and of course, the great role of pilgrims in American society, and of course, the capital on the hill, the notion of the pilgrim, and so that pilgrimage involves movement, and that movement is movement across terrain, what I would like to call as multi-topial hermeneutics. And that means the values of society and how every society, especially a so-called superpower, has a tendency to idolize itself. And it is the journalists, as American journalists, creative journalists have always tried to bring a face of other society. Look at question of equality and inequality. It is both the scholars and the journalists, they have come together in showing that how unequal American society is. And it need not be, because at the same level of development, Norway, for example, is as rich as America. Sweden and Denmark, their economic growth and development is not accompanied by this kind of killing inequality that American society has. So therefore, to show to us the mirror of another possibility. So therefore, this whole space of journalism, advocacy journalism, both genuine advocate journalism and advocate journalism, it requires courage, it requires truthfulness. But these are not just individual virtues, they are nurtured in a sense of ecological setting. And therefore, media, and my final thoughts about media, all kind of media. Now, whole question of media and communication. Now, media and communication, yes, but they are also spheres of both mediation and meditation. Now, the poverty of contemporary media is that, like the whole 24/7 news and everything, that instant, the moment of the instant, it makes us a prisoner of the instant. Therefore, instantaneously, we transform ourselves from a silent spectator to a killer or to a supporter of the killing process. So, what can save us here is a little bit of pause, a little bit of meditation, pause in that sense. Therefore, speech is not just speech, communication is not just communication, communication is also listening. So, today, in a society bombarded by noise, both from left and right, how do we practice advocacy journalism as a way of building society where we also transfer the whole practice of journalism into a journey, a multidimensional journey of transformation, and we also transfer media into spaces of mediation, meditation, communication, silence, and transformation. Listening to, speaking about vulnerability, not only vulnerable human groups, but also vulnerable species on earth. So, where would
Yes.
we have an advocacy journalism for our Mother Earth? how can we listen as Rachel Carson spoke, the silent spring? But how can we listen to the silent spring, but also the silent bird, but also the anguish of coronavirus? Where has coronavirus come from? So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir, for your thought-provoking and very creative, critical, and very thought-engaging session. And it's very important that you are underlying the very significant aspect of journalism, which is largely sociological. Uh, and somewhere I read Mr. Uh, Manuel Castor, you know, he once said that media become the messenger, has to become a messenger rather than the message. So with this word, now I would like to invite Dr. Devendra Kumar Tiwari to give a vote of thanks because we are running out of the time. So Tiwari, please.
Sir, thank you very much for inviting me to propose the vote of thanks. And I would like to begin this vote of thanks by quoting King Martin Luther Jr. Justice anywhere, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Really, this line is very relevant in context of today's talk. Justice or injustice is reported by media. And if media is under threat, if media is under check, or if there is some licensing act, so of course, media will fail to give the proper reporting or exact reporting, and definitely there will be injustice. So with this, I would like to propose this vote of thanks. Thank you, Professor Randhir Gautam, for giving me this opportunity to propose this vote of thanks. And now on behalf of Raise Global Foundation, USA, as well as India chapter, I would like to express my deep and heartfelt gratitude to our today's distinguished speaker, Miss Janice S. Ellis, and I would like to congratulate and appreciate the way ma'am has delivered her ideas with citing so many relevant examples. The lecture was very engaging, full of information, and definitely I'm sure even a layman who don't have any background of in the field of journalism will have an idea what journalism is and what is need of advocacy in the field of journalism. So thank you, ma'am, once again from bottom of my heart for your thought-provoking presentation. Now, next, I would like to express my deep felt gratitude to the chief patron of Raise Global Foundation, Ms. Deepika Dave, for encouraging us to frame and organize such kind of events regularly. Ma'am, thank you once again. Next, it is my honor to welcome and express my deep felt gratitude to Professor Anand Giri sir for being today's discussant as well as our source of inspiration for framing and executing such kind of activities. Sir, it is our blessing and we are very happy to welcome you and express our thanks to you, sir. Thank you once again. Now, last but not the least, this program would have not been successful without active participations and discussions and the variety of questions asked by our honorable and distinguished participants. So from bottom of my heart, I express my deep felt gratitude and thanks to all the participants. Now, I would like to thank once again to Professor Randhir Gautam and the convener of this program and our chief patron, Deepika Daveji for being the source of motivation. So that's it. Thanks once again, everybody, and have a nice time. Goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye. Namaste.
Namaste. Thank you, Janice. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Bye bye.
Thank you, everyone.